My mother is not a liar. She was telling everyone that my mother trapped her son.
The crystal chandelier in the Grand Celestial Hotel's private ballroom cast fractured rainbows across 200 faces frozen in collective shock. Seoul's elite had gathered for the Kim family's annual charity gala, an event where billion-won donations were announced like cricket scores and political alliances were sealed over champagne that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But tonight, the carefully orchestrated performance had shattered. At the center of the marble floor stood a 6-year-old boy in a perfectly tailored navy suit. His hand raised, pointing directly at the matriarch of the Kim chaebol empire. "My mother," the child said, his voice cutting through the silence with unnatural clarity, "is not a liar." Madam Kim Young. His face had gone the color of old paper. Her fingers, weighted with jade and diamond rings, gripped the microphone stand as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The boy took 3 steps forward. His movements were precise, controlled, trained. But his eyes burned with something wild and true. "You told everyone she tried to trap your son. You said she stole from your family. You made people believe she was." He paused, searching for the English word his mother had taught him never to use about himself, then switched to Korean, his accent perfect. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Standing at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a marble pillar, stood Kim Jae-won, the family's estranged eldest son, the one the society pages called the exile, the rebel, the one who walked away. His jaw was set, his hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the woman beside him. Naomi Chin Williams stood perfectly still, her dark skin luminous under the chandelier light. Her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that had taken her 3 YouTube tutorials to master. She wore a deep burgundy gown that had cost a fraction of what the other women in the room were wearing, but she carried it with more dignity than any of them could buy. She hadn't wanted to come tonight. Had spent 3 days arguing with Jae-won about it. But their son had insisted. "I need to see them, Iyama," Min-jun had said in that serious way of his, the one that made him seem 40 instead of 6. "I need them to see me." Now, watching her baby stand alone in front of the wolves who had tried to destroy her, Naomi felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain, but its opposite. Pride so fierce it felt like a second heartbeat. Madam Kim finally found her voice. "Security. Remove this child immediately." "I wouldn't do that." The voice came from the ballroom's main entrance. Every head turned. Kim Jae-won stepped into the light, Naomi's hand now held firmly in his. They walked forward together, their steps synchronized, 2 people who had learned to move as one unit through years of standing together against storms. "Hyung." The word came from a man near the front, Kim Tae-min, younger brother, currency of Kim Industries, and the reason Naomi had once believed in fairy tales. He looked older than his 34 years. Good, Naomi thought distantly. Weakness ages you differently than suffering does. Jae-won's voice carried across the ballroom with a kind of authority that came from building your own empire rather than inheriting one. "Before you throw my son out of this hotel, you might want to know that every major media outlet in Seoul has been sent a very interesting packet of information, with instructions to publish if I don't send an all-clear signal within the next 30 minutes. Your son." Madam Kim's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "That child is the product of a gold digger scheme to what?" Naomi's voice stopped her mid-sentence. It was the first time Naomi had spoken, and something about her tone, quiet, controlled, absolutely done with being afraid, made even the society matrons in their million-won hanbok straighten in their seats. "To trap your son who never wanted to be a father. To steal from a family that gave me a $3,000 monthly allowance and called it generosity. To manipulate my way into a marriage where I was called a monkey at the dinner table while your son sat there and said nothing." The silence that followed was different now. Listening. Hungry. Naomi took 3 steps forward, and the crowd parted like water. She moved until she was standing beside her son, one hand dropping to his shoulder. Min-jun leaned into her touch immediately, and something about that simple gesture, the absolute trust of a child in his mother, said more than any speech could. 7 years ago, Naomi continued, her voice steady, I walked out of your house with one suitcase and a heart that felt like broken glass. You made me sign an NDA that said if I ever spoke about what happened in that family, you'd destroy me legally and financially. You gave me 1,000,000 won, about $800, and called it a severance package for a 2-year marriage. She turned slowly, making eye contact with specific faces in the crowd. A reporter she recognized. A women's rights activist who had recently gone viral. A rival chaebol family matriarch who had her own reasons to want the Kims humiliated. I was 24 years old. I spoke Korean badly. I had no family in this country, no money. And I was 3 months pregnant with a child his father didn't want to acknowledge. Naomi's voice never wavered. You all know what you read in the news 7 years ago. Tonight, you're going to learn what actually happened. What do you think really happened 7 years ago? Drop your theories in the comments. As we are about to find out, please don't forget to subscribe. The cafe on Rue de Rivoli had terrible Wi-Fi and the best croissants Naomi had ever tasted. She'd been sitting at the same corner table for 3 hours, her laptop open to a half-finished graphic design project for a boutique hotel in Marais. Her third cup of coffee going cold while she tweaked the color palette for the 15th time. She didn't notice him until he was standing directly in front of her table. Excuses, ma, this seat. Is someone sitting here? His French was terrible, pronunciation all wrong, but his smile was the kind that made you forget to care about grammar. Korean, Naomi registered immediately. She'd spent enough time in the K-beauty aisles of Sephora to recognize the aesthetic. Expensive haircut, designer clothes worn casually. The kind of watch that probably cost more than her entire semester's tuition. It's all yours, she said in English, gesturing to the chair. His face lit up. American. Half. She smiled despite herself. My dad's from Louisiana. Mom's from Taiwan. I'm from confusion. He laughed. Genuine surprised. Sat down without ordering anything, just looking at her with an intensity that should have felt uncomfortable but somehow didn't. Kim Tae-min, he said, extending his hand across the small table. Naomi. She shook it, noting the softness of his palm. Not someone who worked with his hands. Are you in Paris for business or pleasure? Escape, he said, and something in his voice made her look up sharply from her laptop. His smile had gone crooked, vulnerable. My family wants me to be someone I'm not. Paris is where I come to remember who I actually am. She should have known then. Should have recognized the script. The poor little rich boy routine that men like him had been running on women like her since the beginning of time. But Naomi was 22, burnt out from her design program, lonely in a city where she still stumbled over verb conjugations, and he looked at her like she was something rare and precious instead of something temporary and convenient. So when he asked if she wanted to walk along the Seine, she said yes. When he texted her the next morning asking about dinner, she said yes. When he showed up at her tiny 6th-floor walk-up apartment with flowers and wine and that crooked smile, she said yes. For 3 months, Paris was a dream wrapped in spring light and the smell of baking bread. Taemin took her to restaurants she couldn't pronounce the names of, held her hand in the Musée d'Orsay, told her about growing up in a family where love came with conditions and expectations that felt like chains. You're different, he told her one night. His head in her lap while they sat by the Seine watching boats drift past. You don't want anything from me except me. What else would I want? She'd asked, genuinely confused. His laugh had been bitter. You'd be surprised. In August, when his escape was ending and he had to return to Seoul, he'd gotten down on one knee in her apartment. No ring, no planning, just raw desperation in his eyes. Come with me, he'd said. Marry me. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but you make me feel like I can be someone real. Someone good. Naomi's practical side screamed warnings. Her romantic side, the part that had grown up on Disney movies and her parents' love story, whispered yes. What about your family? She'd asked. They'll love you, he'd promised. How could they not? The Kim family compound in Gangnam was not a house. It was a statement carved in stone and glass and old money. Traditional Hanok architecture blended with modern brutalism. 5 buildings arranged around a central courtyard where a 200-year-old pine tree grew like a monument to family longevity. Naomi stood at the main gate with her 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope that was about to be surgically removed. The family meeting happened on her second day. Madam Kim Young-hee sat at the head of a long table in what Taemin had called the Western dining room, as if having multiple dining rooms was normal. The patriarch, Kim Sung-ho, sat beside her, a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and disappointment. Taemin's older brother Jae-won was absent, traveling for work, Taemin had said quickly, not meeting her eyes. And Taemin sat beside Naomi, his hand on her knee under the table, squeezing so hard it almost hurt. "So," Madam Kim said in perfect English, her smile sharp as a paper cut. "Tell us about your family, Naomi." It was a test. Naomi recognized it immediately, the tone that pretended to be friendly while cataloging every detail for later judgment. "My father is a music teacher in New Orleans," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. "My mother immigrated from Taiwan when she was 25. She works in accounting. I have a younger brother who's studying engineering at LSU. No family wealth," the matriarch said. "Not a question." "No," Naomi agreed. "But we were happy." "Were," Madam Kim repeated, latching onto the past tense like a shark scenting blood. "They didn't approve of this marriage. They wanted me to finish my degree first," Naomi said honestly. "They're worried about me being so far from home." "How considerate of them to worry now," Madam Kim said, "after you've already married into one of Korea's most prominent families." Naomi felt Taemin's hand tighten on her knee, heard his sharp intake of breath. Say something, she thought. Defend me. Tell her that's not fair. But Taemin just sat there, silent, his hand squeezing tighter. The patriarch spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. "Do you know what it means to marry into this family?" "I love your son," Naomi said simply. "Love." He said the word like it was a foreign concept he'd heard of but never personally encountered. Love doesn't manage a billion-dollar conglomerate. Love doesn't maintain family reputation. Love is what young people feel before they understand how the world actually works. "Father," Taemin started. "You will attend the family business meetings," the patriarch continued, speaking to Naomi as if Taemin hadn't spoken. "You will learn our expectations. You will dress appropriately. You will not embarrass us in public. You will not speak to the media without approval. You will produce an heir within 3 years. And you will remember that you are not equal to this family. You are married into it. There's a difference." Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I understand." "Do you?" Madam Kim leaned forward. "Because I want to be very clear about something, dear. Our son has always been impressionable. He forms attachments to inappropriate things. We've managed this before." The subtext was clear as a slap. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. And we've gotten rid of all the others." That night, in the guest house where she and Taemin had been given rooms, separate rooms she'd noticed with growing unease, Naomi had tried to talk to him about it. "Your parents. They'll come around," he'd said quickly, desperately. "They just need time to get to know you. My mother's like this with everyone at first. It's not personal." But it was personal. Naomi could feel it in every interaction, every carefully worded criticism, every helpful suggestion that landed like an insult. The way Madam Kim complimented her hair by immediately recommending a salon that could tame it. The way she was given a house wardrobe of conservative hanbok and subdued Western clothing, nothing that showed her shoulders, her collarbones, her actual body. The way the household staff called her Taemin's wife, instead of learning her name. The way Taemin's father asked her, 1 week in, if she'd signed a prenuptial agreement. When she said no, he'd simply smiled and said, "How unfortunate for you if things don't work out." But the worst part wasn't the family. The worst part was watching the man she'd married in Paris, the one who'd held her hand and told her she made him feel real, disappear like he'd never existed. In his place was someone smaller, quieter. Someone who said, "Yes, mother, and of course, father," and looked at Naomi with apologetic eyes that never translated into actual defense. 3 months into the marriage, at a family dinner where business associates were present, one of the older executives had made a joke about exotic tastes while looking directly at Naomi. She'd frozen, shame and rage burning equally in her chest. Taemin had laughed. Actually laughed like it was funny, like his wife being compared to a foreign delicacy was just part of the entertainment. That night, she'd locked herself in the bathroom and cried so hard she'd thrown up. When she'd finally come out, Taemin was sitting on the bed, head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he'd whispered. "I should have said something." "Then why didn't you?" "Because..." He'd looked up at her and she'd seen it then. The weakness at the core of him, the truth she'd been too in love to see in Paris. "Because if I defend you, they'll just make it worse for both of us. If I stay quiet, eventually they'll get bored and move on." "That's not how this works," Naomi had said quietly. "You don't understand how this family operates." "Then help me understand." But he couldn't. Or wouldn't. And as the months wore on, Naomi began to realize that Taemin hadn't married her to escape his family's expectations. He'd married her to prove to himself that he could make one decision they didn't approve of. And now that the decision was made, now that the rebellion was over, he didn't actually know what to do with her. The theft accusation came 6 months into the marriage, on a Tuesday morning when Naomi had finally worked up the courage to ask about getting her own bank account. "Some jewelry has gone missing," Madam Kim announced at breakfast, her voice casual. "A diamond bracelet. Very valuable. Family heirloom." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. "I didn't take it," Naomi said immediately. "Of course not," Madam Kim agreed too quickly. "But you understand we'll need to search your rooms. Just procedure. I'm sure it's simply been misplaced." The search took 3 hours. They didn't find the bracelet, because Naomi had never taken it, but they did find, mysteriously tucked into her dresser drawer, $3,000 in American currency that she'd never seen before. "I didn't put that there," Naomi said, her voice rising with panic. "Then how did it get there?" The patriarch looked at her with something like satisfaction. "Someone planted it." She turned to Taemin, desperate. "You know I didn't do this. Tell them." Taemin wouldn't meet her eyes. "I don't know what to think anymore." That's when she understood. They'd done this before. The matriarch had said as much. They'd managed Taemin's previous attachments. This was the playbook. Manufacture a scandal, make the woman look unstable or criminal or gold-digging, force her out with an NDA and a settlement. "I want a divorce," Naomi heard herself say. "We'll discuss it with our lawyers," the patriarch said immediately, as if he'd been waiting for exactly those words. But Naomi didn't wait for the lawyers. She spent the next week gathering evidence. Screenshots of her bank account showing she'd never spent anything she couldn't account for, emails from before the marriage showing Taemin pursuing her, not the other way around, voice memos she'd been secretly recording since the theft accusation because some instinct had told her to document everything. She went to see a lawyer on her own, a young woman who specialized in international family law, and looked at Naomi's story with fury in her eyes. "They're trying to trap you," the lawyer said. "If you sign what they give you without reading it, you'll have no legal recourse. No ability to tell your side. Nothing. What should I do? Fight." But fighting required money, required time, required a support system in a country where Naomi had no family, few friends, and a last name that now felt like a target on her back. And fighting required courage that was leaking out of her more every day as Taemin withdrew further and further, until they were strangers living in separate rooms, passing each other in hallways like ghosts. When Naomi discovered she was pregnant in April, 3 months after the theft accusation, 2 months into the divorce proceedings, she knew immediately that she wouldn't tell them. The Kim family didn't want her. Didn't want anything she could give them. But this baby, her baby, deserved better than to be a bargaining chip in a war she was losing. So when the final settlement was offered, 1 million won, an NDA, and a clean break, Naomi signed it with one hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. Taemin wasn't even there for the signing. He'd sent his lawyer. The last time she saw him was through the car window as the driver took her to the airport. He was standing on the steps of the main house, hands in his pockets, looking like a man at his own funeral. He didn't wave. Neither did she. The women's shelter in Hongdae smelled like disinfectant and instant ramen, and the specific kind of exhaustion that came from starting over with nothing. Naomi had been there for 2 months, her belly just starting to show under loose clothing. Her savings from the settlement already dwindling because Seoul was expensive and she was unemployed and too ashamed to call her parents and admit what a spectacular mistake she'd made. She was sitting in the common room, working on a freelance logo design on her battered laptop, when the shelter director approached her with a strange expression. "There's someone here to see you." Naomi's heart stopped. Did they give a name? Kim Jae-won. The name meant nothing to her for a full 5 seconds. Then she remembered. Taemin's older brother. The one who was never around. The exile. She almost said no. Almost refused to see any member of that family ever again. But curiosity, or maybe just the bone-deep loneliness of having no one in this country who knew her story, made her say, "Okay." He was waiting in the shelter's small visitor room, standing with his back to the door, looking out the window at the street below. Tall, broader than Taemin, dressed in a simple black suit that probably cost a fortune but looked lived and comfortable. When he turned around, Naomi was struck by how different he looked from his brother. Same genetic foundation, completely different architecture. Where Taemin's handsomeness was soft and boyish, Jae-won's was sharp and weather-worn, like someone who'd actually lived a life instead of being decorative in one. "Naomi Chin-Williams," he said. Not a question. "That's me." She stood by the door, defensive. "Why are you here?" "To apologize." He said it simply, directly. "And to offer you a job." She laughed, bitter, disbelieving. "A job? I run an independent investment firm. I left my family's company 5 years ago because I couldn't stomach the way they did business. I've been building something different, something clean." He paused. "I need a designer. Someone who understands branding. Your portfolio is excellent." Naomi stared at him. "How did you even find my portfolio? You're still married to my brother in the public record. I wanted to know who you were. Found your design work. Impressive. And you just happen to need a designer right now. Not suspicious at all." "I've needed one for 6 months," Jae-won said evenly. "I've been waiting for the right person. Someone who understands what it's like to rebuild from scratch." "Why do you care?" The words came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. His expression shifted, something like pain crossing his features. "Because I know what that family does to people who don't fit their mold. I've spent 5 years undoing the damage they did to me. I can't undo what they did to you. But I can offer you a real job with real pay and no strings attached. You can say no. I'll leave and never contact you again. But if you say yes, I promise you'll be treated with respect and paid fairly. Nothing more. Nothing less." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, searching for the catch, the angle, the hidden agenda. All she saw was a tired man who seemed to mean what he said. "What's the pay?" she asked. He named a figure that made her knees weak. "When do I start?" The job was exactly what he'd promised. No weird power dynamics. No family interference. Just work. Good, challenging, creative work that made Naomi remember why she'd fallen in love with design in the first place. Jae-won treated her like a professional colleague. Nothing more. He never asked about Taemin. Never mentioned the divorce. Never looked at her with pity or judgment. When her pregnancy became obvious at 5 months, he'd simply asked, "Do you need modified hours or work from home flexibility?" "You're not going to ask who the father is," she'd said, defensive. "It's not my business unless you want it to be." She'd cried in the bathroom for 15 minutes after that conversation. Not from sadness, from the shock of being treated like a human being instead of a scandal. As the months passed, as her belly grew and her confidence started to slowly rebuild, Naomi began to notice things about Kim Jae-won. The way he always made sure she had lunch breaks and never scheduled meetings late in the day when she was tired. The way he defended her design choices to difficult clients with absolute conviction. The way he never touched her without asking first, Even casual things like, "Can I help you with that box?" The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve not for his own benefit but for hers. "Why did you really leave your family?" she asked him one evening when they were working late, her ankles swollen, her back aching. His office somehow still the place she felt safest in Seoul. Jae-won had looked up from his computer. Considered the question. "They wanted me to bury evidence of labor violations in one of our factories. Workers were getting hurt because of faulty equipment. It would have cost millions to fix properly. My father told me to pay off the families quietly and move on." He'd paused. "I refused. Reported it to the labor board. Got the factory shut down and properly renovated. My father told me I was weak and sentimental. That I didn't understand how business worked." "What did you say?" "I said that if business requires destroying people, then I didn't want to understand it." He'd smiled sad. "He disowned me that afternoon. I walked out with nothing except my education and my reputation. Built this firm from scratch. No regrets." Naomi had asked. "Only that I didn't do it sooner." That was the moment, if Naomi was honest with herself later, when she started falling for him. Not the dramatic Paris whirlwind she'd experienced with Taemin. This was different, quieter. A foundation being laid stone by stone instead of a castle built on sand. Minjun was born on a snowy Tuesday evening, 3 weeks early and furious about it, screaming his way into the world with a set of lungs that made the nurses laugh. Naomi had called Jae-won when her water broke, not because she expected him to come, but because he'd made her promise to tell someone when the time came. He'd shown up at the hospital in 30 minutes, still wearing his suit from work, panic and concern written clearly across his face. "I'm not the father," Naomi had said through contractions, needing to make it clear. "I know," he'd said. "But I'm your friend. And you shouldn't be alone." He'd stayed through the entire labor. Held her hand when she squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. Brought her ice chips and encouraging words and never once looked uncomfortable or like he wanted to be anywhere else. When Minjun finally arrived, small and perfect and absolutely hers, Jae-won had looked at the baby with something like wonder. "He's beautiful," he'd said quietly. "He looks like..." Naomi had trailed off, unable to say it. "Like someone who's going to have a better life than his parents had," Jae-won had finished. "Because he has you." That was when Naomi had started crying, not from pain or exhaustion, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen and valued and supported in a way she'd never experienced in her entire marriage to Taemin. Over the next 2 years, Jae-won became something she hadn't expected. Family. He was there for Minjun's first steps. His first words, which were "Mama" in English because Minjun loved books. His first birthday party in Naomi's tiny apartment, just the 3 of them and a store-bought cake. And somewhere in those 2 years, friendship became something more. It wasn't explosive. Wasn't dramatic. It was Jae-won showing up with groceries when he knew Naomi was too tired to shop. It was Naomi redesigning his entire company's brand identity because she wanted to, not because he'd asked. It was Minjun calling him uncle, and Jae-won looking at the little boy like he'd been given something precious. "I'm in love with you," Jae-won said one evening when Minjun had fallen asleep between them on the couch mid-movie. "I've been in love with you for a year, maybe longer. I don't expect you to feel the same way. You've been through hell, and I never want to make you feel pressured or..." Naomi had kissed him, soft and certain and completely sure. "I love you too," she'd said. "But I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of this being another mistake. Of you changing. Of your family destroying us." "My family has no power over me anymore," Jae-won had said firmly. "And I'm not Taemin. I will never be him. I will choose you. Every time. Every day. I promise." And he had. For 4 years he kept that promise. They married quietly in a small ceremony with just Naomi's parents, who flew in and immediately loved Jae-won, and a few close friends. No family drama. No society pages. Just 2 people choosing each other. When Naomi got pregnant with their daughter, Jaewon had cried. Actually cried. Standing in their bathroom, holding the positive pregnancy test, overcome with joy. Min-jun's going to be a big brother, he'd whispered. And Min-jun, serious, thoughtful, wise beyond his years, had looked at Jaewon and said, "That makes you my real appa." "I always was," Jaewon had said. "I've been your father since the day I met your mother." The envelope arrived at Jaewon's office on a Monday morning, unmarked except for a legal firm's return address. Inside was an invitation to the Kim family's annual charity gala. "They've never invited me before," Jaewon said, staring at the heavy cardstock like it might explode. "It's been 7 years," Naomi said quietly. "Maybe they want to reconcile. Or maybe they've figured out who Min-jun's father is." The paternity secret had been easy to keep when Min-jun was a baby. Genetics were ambiguous in infants. But at 6 years old, Min-jun looked undeniably like his father. Had the same eyes, the same sharp jawline, the same serious expression when he was thinking. Anyone who knew Taemin would recognize the resemblance. "What do we do?" Naomi asked. "We don't go," Jaewon said immediately. But Min-jun had been standing in the doorway, listening. "I want to go." They'd both turned to look at their son. This little boy who read chapter books and asked questions about ethics and justice, who'd once asked his mother why his first father didn't want him. "Why?" Naomi had asked gently. "Because they told lies about you," Min-jun said simply. "And lies should be fixed. Which is how they ended up here. Would you confront the family that hurt you, or would you stay away? Comment below." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every eye in the room tracking her movement as she stood beside her son, facing the family that had tried to erase her. "You want to know what really happened?" she said, her voice carrying across the space with perfect clarity. "Let me tell you about the family that welcomed me with racist jokes and emotional abuse disguised as tradition. Let me tell you about the husband who promised to protect me and then sat silent while his mother called me a gold digger at the dinner table." Taemin had gone pale. "Naomi, this isn't appropriate." She cut him off with a laugh that had edges. "No, it's not. Just like it wasn't appropriate when your father accused me of theft. When your mother had money planted in my room to frame me. When I was forced to sign an NDA or face legal destruction. Lies," Madam Kim hissed. "All lies. We gave you everything. You're an ungrateful." "I have documentation," Jaewon interrupted, his voice cutting through his mother's rising hysteria like a blade. He pulled out his phone, held it up. Bank records showing the exact date that $3,000 was withdrawn from the family accounts and deposited in cash, the same day before Naomi's room was searched. Security footage from the house showing family staff entering Naomi's room when she wasn't there. The original draft of the settlement agreement your lawyers prepared 3 months before the theft accusation. Proof you were planning to remove her from the family regardless. The crowd erupted in whispers. The reporter Naomi had spotted earlier was recording on her phone. This was it. The moment of no return. Jaewon continued relentlessly. "And for the people wondering about the child, yes, Min-jun is Taemin's biological son. Naomi was 3 months pregnant when she left. She never asked for child support. Never made demands. She rebuilt her life from nothing while carrying a child she knew the Kim family would try to use as a weapon." Taemin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was pregnant." "Because you never asked," Naomi said quietly, looking at him directly for the first time in 7 years. "When I left, you didn't call. Didn't check if I was okay. You just let me disappear. Like I was garbage you'd taken out." Something in Taemin's face cracked. "I thought you'd be better off without me. You thought you'd be better off without the inconvenience of a wife who wouldn't cooperate with her own erasure," Naomi corrected. "There's a difference." Min-jun's small hand slipped into hers. She looked down at her son, this brave, brilliant boy who'd insisted on coming here tonight, and felt something settle into place. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I'm not here to destroy your family, Naomi said, addressing the room now instead of the Kims specifically. I'm here because my son deserves to know where he came from. And because no one, should be able to weaponize power and money to rewrite someone's story while they're still alive to tell it. She turned to face Madam Kim directly. You tried to make me disappear. You paid me $800, and told me to be grateful. You made me sign away my voice. You spread rumors about me being a gold digger, a thief, a manipulator. And for 7 years, I stayed quiet because I was afraid of you. Naomi's voice dropped lower, more intimate, forcing the entire ballroom to lean in to hear. But I'm not afraid anymore. 'Cause I survived you. Built a career. I raised a son who knows what integrity looks like because I showed him every single day. I married a man who treats me like an equal partner instead of a possession. And I did all of that while you sat in your mansion convinced you'd won. This is slander, the patriarch said, but his voice had lost its authority. He sounded old suddenly. Uncertain. It's truth, J1 said. And if you try to sue for slander, I'll make sure every piece of evidence becomes public record. The abuse, the frame-up, the patterns of behavior. Because Naomi wasn't the first woman this family destroyed, was she, father? The silence that followed was damning. Madam Kim's hands were shaking. We gave that boy everything we had. He threw it away for some. Be very careful what word you choose next, J1 said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Because that's my wife you're about to disrespect. And I'm not Taemin. I don't stay silent. Your wife. Taemin looked between them, confusion and something else. Jealousy? Regret. Crossing his features. You married my brother. I married a man who saw me as a human being, Naomi said. The fact that he's your brother is incidental. Minjun tugged on her hand. When she looked down, he was staring at Taemin with an expression far too old for his face. Are you my first father? Minjun asked, his pronunciation careful, switching between English and Korean the way he always did when he was processing something big. The ballroom held its breath. Taemin took a step forward, then stopped, like he wasn't sure he had permission to approach. Yes, he said hoarsely. I am. Did you know about me? No. Taemin's voice cracked. I didn't know. If I had. You would have what? Minjun interrupted, and there was something devastating about hearing a 6-year-old call an adult on their excuses. Would you have been brave? Would you have protected my Yama? Or would you have let your parents hurt us like you let them hurt her before? Taemin had no answer. Minjun looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to Jaewon. Can we go home now, Appa? I don't like it here. Soon, Jaewon said gently. Your mother needs to finish. Naomi felt something warm spread through her chest. Her family, her real family, standing beside her, supporting her. She looked back at the crowd, at the phone's recording, at the reporter whose fingers were flying across her phone screen, live tweeting probably. I want to be clear about something, Naomi said. I'm not here to claim inheritance. I'm not here to demand child support. I don't want your money. I never did. What I wanted, what I needed was basic human decency. And you couldn't even give me that. She pulled a folded document from her clutch, the NDA she'd signed 7 years ago, now marked with red annotations from her lawyer. This NDA was signed under duress by someone who barely spoke Korean, had no legal representation, and was being threatened with deportation and financial ruin. My lawyer says it's likely unenforceable. But I'm not going to break it through legal loopholes. Naomi held the paper up, then slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. The ripping sound echoed through the ballroom. I'm breaking it because I choose to. Because my voice is worth more than your threats. And if you want to sue me, go ahead. I'll see you in court. And I'll bring every piece of evidence of what you did to me. And what you did to the others before me. She turned to the reporter. You're recording this. The woman nodded, eyes wide. Good. Make sure you report it accurately. Not the scandal version where I'm the villain. The truth version where a powerful family tried to destroy a young woman for not being who they wanted her to be. Naomi took Minjun's hand and Jaewon's hand and started walking toward the exit. Behind them chaos erupted. Voices shouting. The matriarch demanding security. Other guests arguing amongst themselves. The unmistakable sound of Seoul's elite society fracturing in real time as they chose sides. They were almost to the door when Taemin's voice stopped them. Naomi, please. Can I talk to him? To Minjun. She turned slowly. Looked at the man who'd once promised her everything and delivered only pain. That's not my decision, she said quietly. Minjun gets to decide if he wants a relationship with you. Not me. Not you. Him. She looked down at her son. What do you think, baby? Minjun studied his biological father with serious eyes. I think, he said carefully, that you need to be sorry for real. Not sorry because everyone is watching. Sorry because you hurt my Yama and that was wrong. I am, Taemin said, and for the first time he sounded genuine. Broken. I am so sorry. I was weak. I was a coward. I should have protected you and I failed. Both of you. Sorry is a start, Minjun said, sounding bizarrely like a mediator in a business negotiation. But starts are just starts. You have to do the rest too. I will, Taemin promised. If you give me a chance. Minjun looked up at Naomi. Can we think about it? We can think about anything you want, Naomi said, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously at her son's wisdom. You don't have to decide tonight. They walked out of the ballroom together, mother, father and son, into the Seoul night that smelled like possibility and freedom. Behind them, the Kim family empire began its slow, inevitable collapse. 2 weeks later, the story broke like a tsunami. Within 12 hours of the gala, #Kim Family Scandal was trending nationwide. By the end of the week, international outlets had picked it up, not just as a society scandal, but as a conversation about power, race, and abuse in elite families. The reporter who'd recorded Naomi's speech had done exactly what Naomi had asked, reported the truth. No sensationalism. No villain edit. Just the facts laid out clearly and damning. Other women came forward. 3 of them. Previous girlfriends of various Kim family members who'd been paid off, intimidated, discarded. Their stories were eerily similar to Naomi's. The love bombing, the family pressure, the manufactured scandals, the NDAs. The labor violations Jae-won had reported 5 years ago were reinvestigated. New violations were found. The Kim Industries stock price plummeted. And through it all, Naomi went to work, picked up Minjun from school, made dinner, lived her life. Because the thing about surviving abuse from powerful people is that eventually, you realize they only had as much power as you gave them. And she'd stopped giving them anything years ago. The aftermath came to her apartment on a rainy Thursday evening in the form of Kim Taemin, standing in the hallway with flowers and the kind of desperate hope that made Naomi's heart hurt for the boy he'd been before his family broke him. I don't expect forgiveness, he said before she could speak. I don't deserve it. But I'd like to see my son. If he wants to see me. And I'd like to start paying child support. Retroactively. Whatever I owe for 7 years. Naomi studied him. He looked different. Thinner, older, like he'd been awake for days. His expensive suit was rumpled. His hair unstyled. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, real. Minjun is with Jae-won at the park, she said. They should be back in an hour. You can wait if you want. But Taemin, I need you to understand something. Anything. You're not his father because of biology. Jae-won is his father because he showed up. Every day. For years. You don't get to swoop in now and claim a relationship you didn't build. If Minjun wants to know you, that's his choice. But you'll never replace Jae-won. You're not in competition with him. You're just someone else in Minjun's life. If he allows it. Taemin nodded, eyes red-rimmed. I understand. I just want to try. To be better than I was. Then start by being honest, Naomi said. With yourself. About why you really failed us. It wasn't just your parents. It was you. You chose comfort over courage. You chose family approval over your wife's dignity. Own that. I do, he said quietly. I own all of it. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be someone my son could be proud of. Naomi let him inside. Miti waited. When Jae-won and Min-jun came home, soaking wet and laughing about a dog they'd seen doing tricks in the park, Min-jun stopped short when he saw Taemin. Hello, he said politely, with the careful courtesy Naomi had taught him. Hello, Taemin said back, and his voice was shaking. I was hoping we could talk. If you want to. Min-jun looked at Naomi, then at Jae-won, reading the room the way he always did. Jae-won nodded slightly. It's okay. I'm right here. Okay, Min-jun said. He climbed onto the couch next to Taemin. Not close but not distant either. Observing. I want to apologize to you, Taemin said. For not being there. For not protecting your mother. For being a coward when I should have been brave. Why were you a coward? Min-jun asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious. Because I was scared of my parents. Scared they wouldn't love me if I didn't do what they wanted. And I thought their love was more important than doing what was right. That was dumb, Min-jun said bluntly. Taemin laughed, a broken, wet sound. Yes, it was very dumb. My appa, my real appa, Min-jun gestured to Jae-won, says that being scared is okay. But being scared is not an excuse for hurting people. Your appa is right, Taemin said. And he's a better man than I am. I know, Min-jun said. Then, with the brutal honesty of children. But maybe you could be better too. If you tried really hard. I'm going to try, Taemin promised. If you let me. Min-jun considered this. You can come to my birthday party next month. But you have to bring a book, not a toy. And you have to be nice to Yama. And if you make her sad, I'll tell you to leave. Naomi watched this moment from the kitchen doorway. Her son negotiating boundaries with a man who'd contributed DNA but not devotion, learning in real time what grace with boundaries looked like. Jae-won came to stand beside her. His hand finding hers automatically. You okay? He murmured. I'm perfect, she said and meant it. 3 months later. The final blow to the Kim family empire came not from external scandal but internal collapse. Madam Kim Young. He stepped down from all public positions, citing health concerns. The patriarch was forced into retirement by the board of directors. Taemin resigned from his COO position, citing the need to focus on personal growth and family. Kim Industries was restructured. New leadership, new policies. A complete overhaul of the toxic culture that had enabled abuse for decades. And through it all, the family that had tried to erase Naomi thrived. Jae-won's investment firm grew. Naomi's design work started getting international recognition. She was even featured in a Korean business magazine as the designer who came back stronger. Min-jun started first grade, made friends, continued to be unsettlingly wise for his age. And their daughter, Sun-hee, was born on a perfect spring morning, healthy and loud and absolutely adored by her big brother who'd spent 9 months practicing how to be gentle with babies. Taemin kept his promise. Showed up to Min-jun's birthday. And the next month's visit. And the one after that. Slowly, carefully, building something that looked like a relationship. Not father-son in the traditional sense, but something honest. Something real. He was in therapy. Had left his family's house. Was learning, painfully slowly, how to be a person instead of a performance. Do you think he'll ever really change? Naomi asked Jae-won one night after Taemin's visit, watching Min-jun show his biological father a drawing he'd made at school. I think he's trying, Jae-won said. And that's more than he did before. Min-jun will decide if it's enough. And if it's not, then he has us. Jae-won said simply. He'll always have us. 1 year later. The invitation came to their home on a Saturday morning. Heavy cardstock, formal calligraphy, achingly familiar. The Kim family's annual charity gala. But this time, the note attached was handwritten. Naomi and J1. This is not an apology. I don't know if I have the right to apologize. But it's an acknowledgement. You were right. About everything. We failed you. Failed our sons. Failed basic human decency in favor of reputation. The new leadership at Kim Industries would like to establish a scholarship fund for international women studying in Korea. We'd like to name it after you, if you'll permit it. And we'd like your input on its mission and values. You don't owe us anything. Certainly not forgiveness. But if you're willing to help us do something good with the platform we misused, we'd be honored. Respectfully, Kim Sung-ho. Naomi read it 3 times. What do you think? She asked J1. I think, he said carefully, that you get to decide. No pressure. No expectations. This is your choice. She looked at the invitation. Thought about the girl she'd been 7 years ago, desperate and alone in a women's shelter. Thought about all the women who'd come forward with their stories. Thought about Min-jun, who carried 2 families' DNA but only 1 family's love. I think, Naomi said slowly, that I want to help with the scholarship fund. Not because they deserve my help, but because other women deserve better than what I got. You sure? No, she admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. The gala that year was different. Smaller. Less ostentatious. The money that would have gone to imported champagne and ice sculptures went directly to the scholarship fund. And when Naomi walked in, not as someone's wife or someone's victim, but as herself, a designer and mother and survivor, the crowd that had once whispered about her scandal now applauded. Not because she'd forgiven. Not because the Kim family had been redeemed. But because she'd stood up and told the truth and refused to be erased. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. 5 years later, Min-jun was 11 years old, tall for his age, with his biological father's eyes and his mother's fierce sense of justice. He was giving a presentation at his school about family history, standing in front of his 6th grade class with poster boards and photographs and the kind of confidence that came from being genuinely loved. My family is complicated, he said, his Korean and English mixing seamlessly now. I have a father who gave me DNA and a father who raised me. I have a mother who survived things she shouldn't have had to survive. I have a little sister who's annoying but I love her anyway. The class laughed. When I was 6, Min-jun continued, I stood in front of a room full of important people and told the truth about what my mother went through. And it was scary. But my Yama taught me that being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Being brave is when you're scared but you tell the truth anyway. He pulled out the final photograph. The 4 of them, Naomi, J1, Min-jun and Sun-hee at the beach last summer. Happy. Together. Real. My teacher said we should talk about where we come from. I come from my mother's courage. From my appa's integrity. From a family that chose each other even when it was hard. That's my history. And I'm proud of it. In the back of the classroom, Naomi watched her son and felt 7 years of pain and healing converge into this single moment. She'd survived. She'd thrived. She'd raised a son who understood that love was a choice, not an obligation. And she'd built a life that no one could take from her. Because at the end of everything, after the abuse, after the betrayal, after the public confrontation and the slow, painful healing, what remained was this simple truth. You are not what they did to you. You are what you survived and became. And sometimes, surviving is the greatest victory of all. If you've experienced emotional abuse, racism, or betrayal in relationships, especially within powerful families or communities, please know, your story matters. Your pain is valid. Your healing is possible. You deserve to be loved with respect, not conditions. You deserve to be believed. You deserve to take up space in this world. And if no one else has told you today, I'm proud of you for surviving. Thank you for reading. Please share your thoughts, your own stories of resilience, and your hope in the comments below. You're not alone.